Welcome to CareCast, CareNet's podcast on family, faith, and life with Roland, CareNet's president and CEO, and Vincent DiCaro, CareNet's chief outreach officer. CareCast and more pro-abundant life commentary from CareNet can be found at care-net.org, where you can watch videos, download ebooks, and subscribe to the Abundant Life blog. Now let's listen in on what Roland and Vince have for us this week on CareCast.
Roland, here we are for yet another episode of CareCast.
Yet another episode of CareCast.
I was just noting before we turned the cameras on that you've been traveling a lot lately. And
I have.
And so I actually admitted that I missed you.
You did.
Yeah.
And I was
You were embarrassed.
I was embarrassed by that. I'm actually blushing.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I'm a deep red. Underneath all of this.
That. Yeah. There's
deep red.
I could see it. In the cheeks.
In the cheeks.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah,
so,
you can tell.
But you're back, and you know, even though you've been on the road, you and I have been talking quite a bit about a variety of issues. And you know, one of the things that is always at the tip of our tongues here at CareNet is this pro-abundant life philosophy that drives us, that motivates our work.
Yep.
So we've been kind of speaking this language, I would say, for nearly a decade now.
Yep.
And we've really sort of firmly established this pro-abundant life perspective as the driving force behind what we do.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really important too is that, you know, I guess the first time I ever sort of said that in any kind of setting was probably 2013.
Oh wow!
So
okay.
So it's
13 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been a while, and it certainly has grown over the years. I mean, God's really revealed more of what this perspective is, and I tell people often when they ask me about it. I remember that I was reading this article on pro-life messaging. And was going through, and they were talking about, well, should we be called like anti-abortion, or should we be called, you know, something else?
Right. In other words, this term pro-life, maybe we need a new term.
We need a new term. Right. And I was new to this work.
Right,
I just started in October of 2012, and I was just trying to get the lay of the land and figure out where the men's room was and all that kind of stuff, which I figured out pretty quickly.
You did.
Then I worked on the lay of the land. Because at my age, first you start with finding out where the men's room is.
Make sure you know where that is.
Then you go to the lay of the land, because otherwise...
Priorities,
Yeah, you know, it's kind of...
I got you.
You understand.
You don't have to explain. I'm reaching that age too. So.
Right. So anyway, I was just trying to figure stuff out, and so I read this article. I'm going through, and there was this debate back and forth, and then in the margin of the article, I wrote the words "pro-abundant life."
Yeah.
True story. I still have the article.
I remember you showed me.
Yeah. Pro-abundant life. And I don't know where that came from. I guess it came from God. That's the way I've kind of viewed it. I said, pro-abundant, wow. And I came down to your office. I said, I believe God kind of gave me a perspective of what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And then, of course, that led us to John 10:10.
Led us to John 10:10, where we started to look at that. And then over time, it's become, the guy kind of built that out over time. So if you've been tracking what we've been doing here, you know, it's good to stay current. So the way we talked about this maybe in 2013, because we only had part of it back then,
sure.
in terms of what God was revealing, is different than maybe how we talk about it now.
It's sort of like having a skeleton key that opens thousands and thousands of locks.
Yes.
Right? But you just don't know where all those locks are yet. But you have this skeleton key, and over time you start to realize, oh my gosh, this skeleton key actually opens that lock, and it opens that lock, and it opens that lock.
Yep.
And that's obviously what God's truth does, right? It could be applied to so many things, and it's become, and like you said, we've grown our understanding of what God is really trying to speak to us through His Word, right, around what it means to be pro-abundant life, and in terms of Jesus actually saying that, right? I came to give them life and abundant life, right?
Abundant life, and how that applies specifically to the life issue.
Yes.
And it's, of course, very, very relevant, as we're going to talk about. And then that sort of culminated with the book that we kind of published. It's back there somewhere, right?
Here. We'll hold it up.
Yeah, look at there.
Yep, look at that.
Look at
The Alternative to Abortion, Why We Must Be Pro-Abundant Life.
You ever seen that before?
By this guy? I've seen it a few times. It's everywhere,
It's everywhere.
I would say it's required reading if you sort of consider yourself to be a pro-life person and want to understand how, like, what's next, so to speak, for the pro-life movement.
Yeah, I think it really is. But I couldn't have written that book in 2013.
Right.
I didn't have all that.
Right.
You know, because God hadn't revealed all of that to me, and
sure.
And frankly, not just me, but others here at CareNet who've been adding to this process and kind of building to that, and helping us to kind of graphically communicate it into the public square. So again, just as sort of a preamble, you know, stay with us.
This right.
This is the process.
Because what we wanted to do now in this podcast and three to follow this is basically do a 4-part series in which we answer the four biggest questions that we've gotten over the years around what this pro-abundant life thing means, right?
Yes.
So people are, have had questions, and so we want to just provide clarity on what the pro-abundant life, what that really means, how what it looks like in reality. Probably the best place to start is I'm just going to say what those four questions are. So again, over the years, we've gotten lots of questions about what this means, and all those questions,
categorize
right? They can all be kind of boiled down to four main questions.
Four main questions. Because I was saying like this is like Chat GPT.
That's right. Right. Yes.
I know you're probably Chat.
I'm Chat.
Well, you're probably Chat. I'm probably GPT.
You're the GPT.
And you can,
what does GPT actually stand for?
Well, you can make up whatever you want as it pertains to me.
I don't know. I might get in trouble. I don't know. I'll think of that off the air.
Off the air. But
Yes.
I'll be GPT. You'll be
I'll
Chat.
be Chat. Yeah. So here we go. We've categorized all these questions.
Yes.
And these are the four questions that we are going to address over the next 4 episodes. So these are the top 4 questions about the pro-abundant life perspective. So doesn't the emphasis on other issues, because you'll see we talk about fatherhood and marriage and discipleship, doesn't this emphasis on other issues distract from the goal of saving unborn lives? Okay. Number 2, doesn't this pro-abundant life perspective create an unattainable workload that will tire out the people working in the pro-life movement? Okay. Number 3, aren't all of these added issues the work of the church and not the pro-life movement? Okay. And number 4, this all sounds good in theory, but what does this look like in real life?
Yes.
Okay. So those are the 4 questions we're going to
Inquiring
minds want to know, right? So let's start with that first question.
Yes.
Okay. Doesn't the emphasis on other issues distract from the goal of saving babies, saving unborn lives?
Yep.
Okay.
And what are these other issues? I think that's good for you to say what those are.
Yeah.
These are other issues that people bring up.
Right. So the other issues, so to speak, in the pro-abundant life perspective are that we need to encourage responsible fatherhood, right? Help people build healthy marriages and relationships, and ideally healthy marriages, right? And then we need to make disciples for Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Right? So those are like the four pillars, so to speak, of the pro-abundant life movement are save unborn babies from abortion, encourage responsible fatherhood, build strong marriages, and you can kind of categorize fatherhood and marriage and build into like building strong families, right? So saving lives, building strong families, and making disciples for Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So those things are sort of integrated.
Yeah.
So, and I think one of the challenges is that some people, put those in silos. You and I both started kind of working in the fatherhood movement, right? And then there's the marriage movement, then there's the pro-life movement, then there's the discipleship movement. Like there's all these different movements, right? But when you think about the gospel, and you think about how God kind of put His word together, these things are not in silos. They're all integrated,
very much so,
in terms of how we think about what we should be doing as followers of Christ. And so I always tell people, I say, well, the best way to start with this, and this is kind of, as I kind of crystallize it now, this was always in the back of my brain, but I never articulated it this way. But, we started talking about something we call the central question.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. The central question. Because I think, when you are dealing with this issue, there's a central question of what are you actually trying to solve? And that's one of the things I kind of wrestled with when I first, started doing this work, and when God called me to this ministry. And the central question is basically this, and we'll put it up on the screen for folks. But, if a woman was facing an unplanned pregnancy, at risk for abortion, and you could change everything except the fact that she was pregnant, what would you want for her? Okay? And let me put a finer point on that. What do you think that God would want you to want for her as a Christian? Right. So we don't take our Christianity and put it over here.
Right.
We bring that with us, right? Because we're followers of Christ. So we should be looking at having a biblical worldview and bring it to every issue that we're looking at. So what would you think that God would want for her? So I started asking that question. So what would you think God would want for her? So, pro-life. Okay, I want her to have the baby.
Absolutely.
Great.
It's a great check. Great starting point. Number 1, right.
Just have the baby?
Right.
Be a single mother with a baby? I mean, we know what the issues are there. Right. But wait, I can change everything. Well, what about the guy who got her pregnant? Well, he's not a great guy, let's say. But you can change that. Because you can change everything except the fact that she's pregnant. And you say, oh my gosh, yeah, I could change everything. Yeah, so I'd want the guy to be involved. Do you want to be a baby daddy who brings diapers, or what do you want? And you start walking through that. Yes, I want to have the baby. Yes, I want the guy involved. How about this? I want him to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. Check. Anything else? Well, I'm a Christian, And I think this couple should be followers of Christ. Okay, so I want them to be a couple that's followers of Christ, and I want them to be married. Yes, right? And we know all the data on marriage. That's the best societal clue to connect fathers and to heart with the mothers of their children and their children,
yeah.
right? So we know that. So I want them to be married, and I want them. And you just walk through that, and you say, well, gosh, I'd want them to be a married couple. Anything else? Well, I want them to be connected to a local church, right? So they could be disciples who live and love like Jesus.
And who make disciples, right?
And who make disciples.
Right. So basically, it's the Great Commandment and the Great Commission.
That's basically what it is.
Right.
That's what we should want.
Right.
For that person. So then the question is, okay, is what we've been doing leading to that?
Right.
And I could submit to you, overturning Roe does not get you there.
No.
A focus on just saving the baby doesn't get you there.
Right.
And in fact,
for sure,
it actually builds the need for the pro-life movement, because we know that single mothers are the ones that are more likely to have children out of wedlock again, and more likely to be what? At risk for abortion.
That's right.
We know that their children are more likely to what?
Become pregnant out of wedlock.
Become pregnant out of wedlock.
And be at risk for abortion.
And be at risk for abortion.
Right.
So we know that strategy actually is part of what's driving the need for, quote, pro-life advocacy. So if you're really about like solving this central question and answering it, then that's actually what you should want. And when I pose this central question to Christians, they just nod along with me. Yep. That's what I would want. Yeah, that's what I want. You take my granddaughter or my daughter or whatever, I could change everything what I want for her. Now, to put a fine point on this, to help you understand that we're actually kind of really aligned with God's word in this, Isaiah 7:14 says that what a virgin would conceive and bear a child.
Right.
So God's kind of locked himself in his word that there's going to be this virgin who's going to conceive and bear a child. And then he comes to Mary.
Right.
And what can he do? He can change everything except the fact that she's pregnant.
Right.
And what does he do?
Gives her Joseph.
Tells Joseph, hey, be a baby daddy with it. Like, no, be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. In other words, what God does in that moment is he creates a disciple-making family that will live and love like the child she's carrying inside her.
And to even put a finer point on the finer point, God comes at that with a pro-abundant life perspective.
Yes.
That is not just about Mary having this child. It's about forming a strong, God-honoring family with a married mother and a father who become disciples of Jesus Christ so that they can make disciples for Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
Right? So again, if you could change everything except the fact that the woman in the, quote, unplanned pregnancy from a human perspective is pregnant, what would you want to have happen? Well, we should probably try to strive for what God had happen, right?
Exactly.
Right? And so, we keep on putting fine points on fine points. So to put a finer point on the finer point that we just, put a fine point on, we've always argued from the very beginning around this notion like, well, does this, quote, distract from the goal of saving babies? We would argue, and I think we have the evidence that suggests that this is true, that you actually have to do those things in order to save babies.
Yes.
And times two. Yes. You have to do those things in order to save the baby now that you're trying to save, and to save future babies from abortion, because the only way that you're going to break that cycle is by doing what we're talking about, which is we need to try to build a strong family, and we need to try to transform them through the gospel. If those two things don't happen, it's likely that they're going to be back in another year with another unplanned pregnancy.
Yes.
So in order to save the baby now, we have to focus on family and discipleship. And in order to save future babies from being aborted, we need to focus on family and discipleship.
That's right.
So this is actually a life-saving strategy.
Sure.
Not a, as we stated in the question, other issues, right?
Oh, it's not even other issues at all. It's actually the central issue.
It's the issue, right?
So if you think about this in the context of the birth of Christ, what do you see? You see marriage. The very first thing you see the angel saying to Joseph is, "Do not be afraid to take Mary as your what? Baby mama?
Right.
Shorty? Boo?
Right.
No, wife.
And you've also noted very importantly that the angel doesn't say first be about the Christ child that Mary.
Exactly.
The angel starts with marriage.
The sanctity of marriage.
Right.
He starts with the sanctity of marriage. And in fact, in the story of the birth of Christ, you see two sanctities. There's the sanctity of marriage and family. Then there's the sanctity of life. Right? So what's happened in the movement is that we focused on the sanctity of life and divorced it from the sanctity of marriage and family. But God didn't do that in the first chapter of the first book of the New Testament. In fact, that was central. In my humanity, I'd be like, okay, first thing, protect the Christ child, save the baby. It's not what the angel did. And in Scripture, order matters.
Right.
There's the first commandment, the second commandment. Like order matters.
And quite literally, in order to actually protect the baby, to quote save the baby, Joseph needed to be there, because what was the very first thing that happened, or very early on in Christ's life?
Yes.
The angel went back to Joseph again.
Yes.
And said, they're trying to come after you and kill you.
Yes.
And this child that you have, you need to get out of here.
You need to get out of here to protect Mary and the child. So
and the angel went to Joseph.
To
do that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if you think about this, just put like in kind of a temporal context as opposed to eternal, what is the one thing that the pro-choice movement has been very, very, very focused on?
Trying to get men to be pro-choice?
Trying to get men to be pro-choice. In other words, for them not to step into that role.
Right.
It's her body, her choice.
Right.
It's like they want him to have no agency, no involvement, unless it's to support the abortion.
Right.
So it should tell you something when the enemy, if you will, of your perspective is focused on a very specific thing. That should probably tell you that thing that the enemy is focused on
pretty important.
It's pretty important. So important that what? They're focused there, which tells you,
maybe we should be focused there.
Maybe that's the very, and sure enough, what does the data show?
Right.
When you look at the data, of women who have abortions, 87% of them are what? Unmarried.
Right.
So I always tell people, explain to me how you're going to solve the abortion issue without the marriage and family issue.
Right. Or maybe, yet another way to put it, how are you going to save babies from abortion today if you're not focused on building strong families? As part of this work save babies.
As part, not an other issue. We'll get to that. But it's actually central. And by the way, again, this is all driven by the data that we found. We did a national survey. Remember, we did a national survey. Two national surveys of women, who had abortions. And we surveyed them about who did they talk to and who was the most influential in their decision to abort. And guess who it was?
Father of the child.
Far and away. Far and away. Wasn't even close. And guess who else knows that? The abortion providers and Planned Parenthood. That's why they want him sitting out in a car while she goes in by herself.
Right. That's right. Absolutely.
That's why, because they know he's an influencer of life. That's why they're focused on the pro-choice movement. To try to get him to be what? An influencer to their perspective.
That's right.
So it's not that they don't care about men, but they want those men to what? Influence in their direction. And we are silent. We should be silent and not try to get the men to influence in our direction.
Right. No, for sure.
And then we surveyed the men who had participated in abortion. Right. And we asked them the same questions. So who did she talk to about the abortion decision and who was the most influential? And guess what?
I was.
So the women who have the abortions are saying he's the most influential. Right? The men who participate say, and we're supposed to say that's another issue. That's extra. That's
a distraction. From the goal of saving
from
babies.
The goal. No, it's central to the goal. Now, I'll put a finer point on the finer point on the finer point.
Yes. We lost track of the fine points.
There's so many fine points.
Yeah.
I live this.
This is your story.
This is my story. This is my story.
That's why you're sitting here today.
That's why I'm sitting here today.
Likely.
Why? My girlfriend at the time, when we were at Princeton, we got pregnant. She went to Student Health Services. Nurse tells her the test is positive, and without taking an extra gulp of air, says, now, of course, you're going to have an abortion. Encourages her to have an abortion. Doesn't give her any other options. And my girlfriend, now my wife, Yvette, says, no, I want to have my baby, and I want to, and the nurse says, my gosh, so how are you going to graduate from Princeton with a baby? What do you want to do? Oh, you're going to become a doctor. How are you going to become a doctor with a baby? Encouraging her strongly. By the grace of God, she came back to the dorm room. We talked about it. We said, no, we're going to move forward. We're going to get married. And that's what we did. We got married. Now, for the first 5 months of her pregnancy, there was one person who knew she was pregnant other than her. Guess who it was? Me. I was the only one who knew. Do you think I had influence?
I think so.
Do you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you think it would have been smart for me to have, and by the grace of God, I did, a pro-abundant life perspective? And I say pro-abundant life, not pro-life. Why? Because I didn't say, hey, listen, you can be a single mother and I'll, give you some money, make sure you finish school or whatever. I said, no, I'm going to be a husband to you and a father to the child growing inside of you. Which is exactly what the angel encouraged Joseph to do. So exactly. These are not, so you see embedded in the birth of Christ.
Right.
Marriage, fatherhood,
Discipleship.
And then discipleship, which is the next piece, and we can kind of pivot to kind of talking about how that's linked there. So we'll probably put up a graph. We'll put up a graphic here that kind of shows you. There's a graphic that we have, which we'll put on the screen, that kind of shows the two pillars holding up the pro-abundant life roof. One is God's design for family, and then the other one is God's call to discipleship.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. And so there's a couple other things that I think will also be helpful for folks to know, because you talked about this central question and the importance of sort of starting there, answering that central question, and then sort of creating your strategy from that answer, right?
Yes.
And so one of the things that you talked about, and you talk about this in your book too, you can get it on Amazon, but I wasn't saying that to try to sell the book, but you do talk about this in your book, where there's basically two kinds of women who have abortions, right? Yes. Today, if you just kind of look at the data in terms of what women are reporting in terms of why they had an abortion, right? One of them is what we call the missing support woman, right? So a woman who feels like she does not have the support that she needs emotionally, spiritually, economically, etc., physically, socially, to have this child. And then the second type of woman is the expressive individualism woman.
Yeah.
So the woman who believes that part of basically expressing herself as an independent woman is that she exercises this right to abortion.
Yes.
Almost like a sort of a rite of passage.
Yes.
That the right to abortion is something that's central to being a woman today.
Yes.
And therefore that she needs to be able to exercise this right whenever necessary, right?
Yeah.
So those are the two types of women who have abortions. And what you've argued is that the pro-abundant life approach is actually the only approach that actually can address both of those kinds of women and address the issues that they're facing that are causing them to choose abortion.
Absolutely, and that's really what you see, the missing support woman, and you can look at Guttmacher's data on that. Why do you want to have abortion? Well, I want to continue my education. I don't have the economics. I don't have the money for it. I don't have this. It's all the missing support stuff, and frankly, and that missing support looks like who? The guy who got her pregnant for the most part, right? My wife faced the missing support question. Right. How was I going to finish Princeton? How was it? All my hopes and my dreams and my aspirations for life. Why was she less likely to have an abortion? Because she had a guy who said, I'll be a husband to you and a father to our child growing inside of you, which meant that missing support, right, wasn't missing anymore.
That's right.
Right? So that's a key role why you have to engage the guy. It's not extra. This isn't icing on the cake. It's foundational. It's foundational, right?
For sure.
But that second kind of woman, right, this expressive individualism, it really it's a great framework. I talk about it in the book that Carl Trueman kind of brings out a lot in his conversations. But it really talks about this fact that there is nothing more important than my individualism, right? There's nothing more important than self.
Right. That's right.
Like, self is supreme. And if there's anything that violates or will hinder my self-actualization, my dream of whatever it may be, nothing can stand in that.
Right, that's right.
So it's like individualism it's just like perverse. It becomes almost toxic individualism.
Right.
So you let nothing stand in the way of what you perceive as happiness that you are
you're entitled to.
You're entitled to.
Right, that's right.
But those are what we hear with different stories. So we've got a little video that actually shows this.
And we'll link to that.
This little video that that folks will be able to look at, where it's this young lady who has a newborn child, pretty much, and she's talking about the fact that she could have aborted the child, holding the baby. It's shocking.
Oh, it's horrible.
But the other thing that really is connected to that is an article that was from 2013. It was one of the things that really helped me see this more. It was by a writer named Mary Elizabeth Williams. She writes for Salon. You can find the article.
At least did at the time.
Did at the time. We'll put a link up to this article.
Yes.
And the title was, So What If Abortion Ends a Life?
Right.
And as you read through this article, she's basically saying, listen, if you're trying to say that the baby in the womb, the fetus in the womb is not a life, you're like a flat earther. Of course it's a life.
Right.
Of course it's a life.
The science, everything confirms that
it's a life. But she ends her post or article with these words: but I will put the life of the mother over the life of the fetus, all the while acknowledging that a fetus is a life worth sacrificing.
Absolutely.
And I read those words and I said, oh my gosh, This is 2013.
Yeah.
They're not arguing about whether the baby is alive or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can imagine 13 years later how much further along that viewpoint is in our culture, embedded in our culture.
That was over here. That is the central position today.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter that it's a life.
That's a life. So your typical apologetic, right, which is important, of trying to affirm the baby's a life, for someone who has that view, they're like, yeah, I know, it's a life worth sacrificing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And what
I
I did that really helped me see this, and you can do this yourself with other examples, but I said, take those last words that she said. And that's how she ends her article. And instead of the word woman and fetus, exchange it for Nazi and Jew. Right? So I would put the life of the Nazi over the life of the Jew, all the while acknowledging that the Jew is indeed a life worth sacrificing. Is that not the worldview that Hitler and the Nazis
You do it
had?
with slave owners and slaves, right?
Slave owner. I put the life of the slave owner over the life of the slave, all the while acknowledging that the slave is indeed a life worth sacrificing.
Yes.
In China, big issue with aborting who? Girls.
Right.
Okay, I will put the life of the baby boy over the life of the baby girl, all the while acknowledging that the baby girl is a life worth sacrificing.
That's right.
Those words are reflected. They reflect the worldview that's caused the most atrocity in this world. And she wrote that 2013. I said, oh my gosh, this is where they're heading.
That is where they're heading.
This is where they're heading.
Yeah.
Which means your perspective, right? Your perspective has to be able to address that woman too. And a pro-abundant life perspective does.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we talked about the two types of women who have abortions, the missing support woman and the expressive individual woman. There really isn't a category of woman who has an abortion which you could call like the woman who doesn't understand that the unborn child that she's carrying is a life. There might be a few,
but it's not really.
That's not the issue. They absolutely understand and know that it's a life, but it's a life worth sacrificing.
It's a life worth sacrificing. Yeah. And so with that expressive individualism, what's the answer to that? The gospel.
That's right.
The gospel.
Right. So again, the gospel is not some, quote, other issue. It's central to stopping abortions among people who are of that expressive individualism worldview.
Yes, she needs to be transformed by the gospel of Jesus Christ.
That's right.
And that's the second pillar of the pro-abundant life perspective. God's design for family, God's call to discipleship. So that's why in the pregnancy center work that CareNet does, and that our affiliates out there and our mobile units out there, that's why we always don't just try to address the missing support piece.
Right.
We also talk about, no, this is a gospel issue. That's why we don't hide the gospel under the bush. That's why in the early conversations with the pregnancy decision line, we're trying to immediately say, so let's talk a little bit about your faith tradition. How does your faith impact you? Why? Because we're searching for that expressive individualism framework as well. Because it's a life worth sacrificing. Then we start to help them understand that this child is created in the image of God. Right? Yep. And that the circumstances of this child's conception and birth should not determine its humanity and worth, and whether it's conceived in love or lust, planned or unplanned, fetal abnormality or perfectly healthy, it's created in the image of God. That is a spiritual transformation. Like Romans 12:2 says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, right? That's why that's so important. Yep. So a pro-abundant life brings both of those things together. And this is the point. You can be an atheist and be pro-life.
That's right.
Right? Because as an atheist, you're solving for physical life, bios in the Greek. Heartbeats. But you can't be an atheist and be pro-abundant life.
Right.
Why? Because that's not part of the framework.
Right.
So a pro-abundant life is perspective is distinctly Christian.
Right, because you're solving for two kinds of life: the bios and the zoe.
The bios and the zoe.
Right, biological life and the spiritual life that can only come from a relationship with Jesus.
That's right, and it's not anchored in a political perspective.
That's right.
It's anchored in John 10:10, which was Jesus' why statement. Why did Jesus come? That we might have life and have it abundantly. And so we, as a ministry here at CareNet, we said, well, gosh, if that's Jesus' why statement, then should that not be our why statement?
Right. Yep.
And that's why we're not a pro-life organization. We are a pro-abundant life ministry. This isn't marketing spin or us just trying to be different or whatever.
Right.
It's anchored in the Word of God in John 10:10.
For sure. And, you know, as we wrap up here, one last pair of lenses to kind of look at this through is another great insight you've had, which is around the types of problems that there are, right? There are simple problems, complex problems, and complicated problems.
Yeah.
Right? And if you kind of just think about those three different kinds of problems, abortion, it would be considered a complex problem, right?
Right.
And you know, the idea here is that simple problems require simple solutions. Complicated problems require complicated solutions, and complex problems require complex solutions.
Absolutely.
Right? So because abortion is a complex problem, it requires a complex solution.
Yes.
And complex solutions always involve what? Relationships.
Right, because that's where I started. That's, you know, I'm a business guy by training. I was just looking at how you think about project management, right? There's simple problems, there are complicated problems, and there are complex problems. Simple problems are known knowns, like a pegboard, right? That's why baby can solve it. Known.
Right.
Complicated problems are known unknowns. That's like a jigsaw puzzle. Or a Rubik's Cube, right? I know what it's supposed to look like. I know there's 1,000 pieces. I know what it's supposed to look like. I just don't know where the pieces go.
Right.
Those problems, simple and complicated, they're not dynamic. They don't change over time.
That's right.
You'll solve the pegboard 1,000 years from now the same way, jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
But then there are complex problems that you talked about, right?
Yeah.
Those are unknown unknowns. Those are unknown unknowns. And to get theological here, in terms of using that framework, when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, they realized that this was a problem. And they said, we have a solution. It's a fig leaf.
Right.
It's like a pegboard.
Right. Yeah.
Well, just done.
Yep.
Easy peasy. And God comes and says, oh, no. This isn't a simple problem, this sin of yours. This isn't even a complicated problem. This is a complex problem. There are unknown unknowns that you don't even know. And he kills a complex creature, an animal, and covers them with that flesh, and then foreshadows that there'll be another complex one who comes to solve what? The complex problem of sin.
Will have to be sacrificed.
Exactly. And he comes in the flesh, which ends where we started, which is the birth of Christ.
Right. That's right.
Because Emmanuel means what? God with us in the flesh.
That's right.
What does that mean? Well, you're talking about solving the problem of abortion. It requires relationships. We know that.
Yep.
It's complex. It's a complex problem. And it requires a loving relationship. That's why this movement has to be led by the church. Because there's one entity that God created to solve the complex problem of sin.
Right.
It's the local church.
That's right.
So
That's right.
God's design for family. Families are designed to solve complex problems in loving relationships. God's call to discipleship. The church family is designed to what? Solve the complex problem of sin. God's design for family, God's call to discipleship, complex problems being solved by loving relationships. We've tried to solve the problem with abortion with simple solutions and maybe even some complicated ones. But the one thing that you see in the Word of God, anchored in John 10:10, that he gave us to solve the complex problem of abortion, we sat in the back. We fundraise from the church, we this, that, and the other. No.
Yes.
This is the church's work, and everyone else's.
Right. And that actually is what one of the next of the three questions that we're going to answer. And I'm going to repeat the four questions. So in this episode, you heard Roland and I talk about this first question. Doesn't the emphasis on these other issues distract from the goal of saving unborn lives? So we just hopefully provided a good answer for that. And obviously, if there are still questions, we're happy to take those and continue to address this. The next question is, doesn't this create an unattainable workload that will tire out the people working in the pro-life movement? In fact, that question might very well be a question that people are now asking themselves as a result of hearing everything that we just had to say. Yep. Wow, it sounds great, but that sounds like a lot. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about this idea of this big workload, so to speak. And then the next question, aren't all of these added issues the work of the church and not the pro-life movement? So we gave you a little bit of a sneak preview there. A little tease there, but we're going to address that question. In fact, we're going to question the very question, and then we're going to answer it. And then number four, this all sounds good in theory, but what does it look like in real life? And we have some beautiful illustrations of what the pro-abundant life perspective looks like in real life that we can share in that episode. Yeah. So thank you, Roland. That was a lot. Yeah.
No problem, chat.
Yeah, I know, right? Yes, GPT. Yeah. Yeah.
It was a lot.
We got to keep those straight.
Yeah. So if you get questions about the pro-abundant life movement, or someone's like characterizing it in a way that is not. We just encourage you to just
send us an email.
Send us an
Vince at care-net.org, Roland at care-net.org.
And here's the thing. You can just send them this discussion because it really helps people understand it here. Yeah. You can refer them to, the book. We've got this book here, Why We Must Be Pro-Abundant Life, which is kind of a smaller version. It's explained in great detail the theological and practical underpinnings of why this framework is there and why we believe
for sure
firmly and strongly that this is a direction that God wants us to head in.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, amen. Thank you, Ron. Great discussion today.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of CareCast. For more Pro-Abundant Life commentary and practical resources, please visit care-net.org. There you can subscribe to the Abundant Life blog, giving you access to videos, ebooks, podcasts, and other resources to help turn your pro-life passion into pro-abundant life action. Until next time, we pray that God blesses you and yours daily.